So good afternoon. My name's Joe Barrett from the GSA. I'll explain that a few people have come up to me today and said, why is the US government General Services Administration here, who spends $60 billion a year? That's not us, right? Although I'd like their budget. We represent the mobile suppliers in the industry. I'd like to start off by introducing the panel. First person there on my right is Shane Rooney, who's IoT Executive Director of the Connected Living Program at the GSMA, the GSM Association. Craig Miller, who's Vice President Worldwide Marketing at Sequans, and Kashif Shakil, Customer Services Sales Director at Ericsson. So welcome. I'm sure we'll have a good panel. The first thing is just to start off with a couple of slides. As I said, the GSA is a not-for-profit association that represents the mobile suppliers, everything from Intel and Qualcomm down to smaller members, Ericsson, of course, and Nokia, Huawei. And we're producing reports. And we have a recent one on the narrowband IoT and the evolution to that. And I think the main thing there is that we're talking about the IoT ecosystem has already been established. We're looking at 19 operators, are committed to rolling out narrowband IoT and also other IoT technologies. And there are 16 3GPP IoT compliant suppliers. And so we're tracking those technologies and making sure that the ecosystems are developing. And within a database that we manage, there are already 72 modules and routers that are IoT compliant. So the ecosystem is starting to build as we move now towards full commercialization of the different technologies. I think there's three areas that we'd hope to cover today on the panel. One is around about timing, and I think we are looking at a roadmap eventually, I think, to trillions of connections in the mobile industry. But timing, there are some variations around timings. There's lots of different services. There was a fantastic connected seal, Scottish seal service that GSMA were promoting at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. But then also revenue. Where is the revenue coming from? And then we just got a couple of slides from GSMA just to set the scene as well, and also from Sequans and from Craig. So Shane will just go through a few of these and explain what these are about.
Thanks, Joe. So I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes bringing you up to date really about the progress of what we call mobile IoT, which is cellular licensed spectrum for low-powered wide area. As you can see, when we look at enterprises, what is the difference that this is actually going to make? Well, we think it's going to be a pretty big game changer from existing machine-to-machine solutions. We have devices and networks now coming online, now that the standards have been agreed, in two flavors, as many of you have discussed, I know, in terms of narrowband IoT and LTE-M solutions. And they have very much common features in that, in terms of they are going to be lower cost modules than existing M2M solutions. You're going to get better coverage, which means that what couldn't be connected before, say in basements and areas which had very poor coverage, should now be able to be connected. And additionally, because of the characteristics of these devices, we will get longer battery life, and many have quoted a 10-year battery life. Of course, that depends on how much data that you actually use and how awake the device actually is. But one of the key things as well is that it's got full two-way communications and uses the existing cellular networks that we have today. I mentioned that these are 3GPP standards, so this is actually the only standard in low-powered wide area. We have global coverage because we're using the existing cellular networks. And of course, mobile operators have experience of connecting over 7.5 billion devices today, so it's going to be secure and scalable. So this year we're going to see a lot of commercial launches, and I think we're going to be discussing some of that in a while. But this solution, or these solutions, are backed by a very thoroughbred ecosystem, as you can see, from chipset manufacturers to infrastructure providers. And while we talk about 5G, this is on the path to 5G. This is part of 5G, which I'll discuss in a few seconds. And hopefully, when we get to the panel part of things, we will have some fruitful discussions on that one. And just to remind you about 5G, in terms of 5G, a lot of people seem to focus on the high-speed, low-latency broadband capabilities of 5G, but 5G is a lot more than just that. And two areas that I would, or three areas I would focus on really on this particular slide, is really about the densification that low-powered wide area solutions are going to bring within 5G. We are going, from a spectrum point of view, probably everything will be around sub 1 gigahertz aspect to actually get the range that you need. And of course, when we talk about massive connectivity, we are focusing on IoT within 5G specifically. So what we've got today is the start, it's the journey to 5G in low-powered wide area.
Okay, Craig, you got a few slides to go through?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Hi, good afternoon. Good to be here at the event. I want to thank RCR Wireless for hosting a great event. So I want to just say a word or two about who Sequans is, so you know the perspective we bring. We're a chip vendor. We're a chipset provider, and our kind of strategic focus is making LTE for IoT a reality, being out there, out front, being first to market, and we've done a lot of firsts around that, including the first LTE Category 1 chipset that was certified now globally, and the first to launch and deploy LTE-M chipsets. In the US last December, we launched with Verizon and are underway with other carriers right now. So we're very proud of our leadership, thought leadership, and product leadership in the LTE for IoT space. And, we've always got to have an up and to the right chart to sort of justify why we're all investing and spending energy and time on this. And I'm just pulling a couple of data points from some recent reports that our friends at Strategy Analytics have produced, as well as the Ericsson Mobility Report some of you may be familiar with, trying to kind of put a number around the cellular IoT, the wide area, low power opportunity, and it's measured in the billions of units. And so this is an important opportunity, an important space for all of us, both network operators, infrastructure vendors, and chipset and module providers to serve that market. So it's a big opportunity, and we're really investing in it. And then finally, I know Joe introduced the idea of kind of the use cases or the services, and this is a graphic that we like to use to sort of show how LTE technology and 3GPP standards technology can address essentially all of the envisionable use cases in what we call the Internet of Things, ranging from the very lowest data using sensors up to the very highest telematics and drones and virtual reality machines. LTE networks and the technologies that are provided in the 3GPP framework can serve any and all of these use cases very ideally in a very optimized way, and I think that's an important message. So one of the things I wanted to communicate to here was also kind of status. Where are we, especially with the new stuff, the LTE-M and narrowband IoT technologies? As you know, these were kind of defined finally in Release 13 last year. And so it's still a relatively new technology, but as I mentioned, we brought out silicon in Q2 of last year. We had it certified by December on a Tier 1 mobile operator network in the US. So Cat-M is here, it's ready to be commercialized, and I think you'll see very soon in the US, LTE-M, nationwide coverage kinds of announcements from one or more of the North American carriers. And another half dozen or so operators around the world are also committing to LTE-M deployments. And I think Joe already mentioned, but almost 20 operators committing to NB-IoT deployments this year. And I think the takeaway from this is the year that this technology moves out of standards and into commercial deployment, and we're really excited to be leading the way.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I could open this up now. So to Kashif, how would you describe what is happening around IoT now in the US with the carriers?
Carriers are interested in IoT, and there is, as our friends from Sequans mentioned also, there's interest from the carriers. In terms of what technology to pick, initially there's interest in Cat M1, and that's primarily because you can cover multiple use cases with Cat M1. And then when it comes to narrowband IoT, there's some operators that are interested in narrowband IoT as well. That would probably be the second phase of IoT rollout in the United States.
Okay. So we're seeing some difference in timings from the US to Europe to Asia. So Shane, how do you see that playing out? What is the reason? Some of the reasons behind that?
Well, I think, Joe, it's a number of factors. First of all, it may be related to what infrastructure that you actually have. As we know, within the US, 2G has been switched off. So that's a clear indicator that LTE-M would be the strategy for North American operators in that respect. Whereas perhaps in Asia and Europe, we have quite a lot of mixed infrastructure providers there as well. 2G is still very important. There's a very important M2M market still there. So you are going to have different speeds as to how those rollouts actually happen. Okay. But I think, this year will be, as Craig pointed out in some of the slides, we're going to see a lot more announcements within that, a lot more speeding up. But there is a difference.
Yeah, I think although we forecasted 25 in the last report, I think as we get towards the middle of this year, I think we may be upping that to more like 30. So let's see how that goes.
Joe, just one point I'd like to add. So it's true that the timing of the first deployment or the decision to deploy NB-IoT versus LTE-M is a decision made based on your situation, your spectrum, your business priorities as an operator. But ultimately, we think really almost all of these operators will end up deploying both technologies because they serve different businesses, different use cases in a different way at different price points, and they're optimized for slightly different use cases. So if the operator cares about covering the most breadth of use cases, they're going to deploy both of these. It's just a matter of which comes first.
That's absolutely true, and that's what I meant, I think, by strategic decisions that they have. Some will start with LTE-M and eventually have NB-IoT as well, and others the opposite way around.
Yeah.
Agreed. I mean, it's really use case dependent, and if you're, for instance, looking at mobility use case, narrowband IoT is probably your second option, and so on the other hand, if you're looking at a use case which is fixed and low bit rate, then narrowband IoT could be your first option. So it's really use case dependent, and okay. I agree that most of the operators are going to go with both.
There was some suggestion in one of the panels yesterday that the price of deploying IoT and devices needs to fall, and we saw that the 0.7 for Cat M1 compared to machine to machine. I think it was 0.4 for narrowband IoT as a ratio of cost. But how important is cost, Craig, from a position of?
As a chip supplier, we're always pushed, I guess, by our customer to deliver the lowest cost and take advantage of Moore's law to integrate more and sell for less and all that good stuff. And I think it is important, but it's not it's not the game changer for this technology. I can give you an example. Over the last 3 years, we, as a vendor in the market, we've seen how far LTE has come down in terms of module pricing. So if you go back 2 or 3 years, an LTE Category 4 multi-mode module from a Tier 1 vendor was in the neighborhood of $50. That was kind of the street price for a multi-mode Cat 4 LTE module with fallback. Single mode LTE Cat 4 was in the 30s. Single mode Cat 1 is in the teens, and Cat M you're going to see single digits. So we've come a long way, but the price alone is not enough to change that to a hockey stick. It's got to come with other value propositions, and that's what comes with Release 13. I think the power consumption capabilities, the energy savings, the battery life that's enabled opens up hundreds of new use cases, and developers can go develop and innovate around this technology now with something they couldn't do before. So it opens the game to a much broader set of use cases, number one. And number two, I think, the whole notion of total cost is sometimes forgotten. There's a life cycle cost that includes the cost of service over that lifetime, the cost of upgrades, the cost of maintaining that connection. So it's not just the UE or the device cost that matters. It's important, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient by itself.
Yeah, I think, Joe, there's been too much emphasis on the price of modules. If we're talking about enterprise and enterprise or what they want to select, yeah, sure, price is obviously an important factor, but there are other factors in terms of reliability, security, availability to a certain extent, quality of service. And I want to work with partners who are going to be around in 10 years' time, because they are looking for that partnership that they can rely on. They're looking for certainty. And that is, one of the things that cellular low-powered wide area actually brings.
So we've heard that there's different use cases for the different technologies. From a 5G perspective, is 5G just going to change the whole dynamics of the IoT industry?
I think on one of the slides that I showed, 5G has got a lot more capabilities. We're going to see the virtualization of networks, but we have this suite of capabilities from, very dense networks, which are going to be needed for the Internet of Things, right up to high-speed, low-latency broadband. So we're going to have 5G is going to be incredibly important, but it may get there slower than you think it's going to be. It's not all going to just happen all at once. It's just not. It's not going to happen overnight.
Right. And for my part, 5G is, kind of an overlay of technologies, a collection of capabilities that are coming to the networks. Everything we're doing right now in NB-IoT, LTE-M, or even any of the legacy LTE technologies, these things sustain and maintain and thrive when 5G gets here. They don't get obsoleted, they don't get sunset. These things will survive and thrive in a 5G environment. Very much unlike I think actually your CTO said this best, maybe I heard him say it at Ericsson, that 5G does not do to 4G what 4G was designed to do to 3G and 3G to 2G. Those were replacement technologies by design, right? They were new technologies that were much more efficient, new air interfaces, more spectrally efficient, new bands, new air interface. That's not the case necessarily with 5G. So none of this stuff gets obsoleted. Nobody should be paralyzed into waiting for 5G before they deploy an IoT service.
Yeah, I think there's more of it's a homogeneous system of 4G and 5G together.
It's an umbrella.
Yes?
Yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of use cases can be covered with 4G today with LTE, narrowband, LTM and narrowband IoT. What 5G does is it unlocks a different class of use cases where real-time interaction is important. If somebody is driving, let's say, a mining machine, That's where millisecond level of latency is required to, for instance, control that type of machinery very well. And that's where 5G comes in as adding a new layer of use cases towards IoT.
Okay, so before I open it up for questions from the floor, there's just one thing around about certification and the fact that an LTM or an IoT device is not the same as a smartphone. So there seems to be a lack of understanding in the certification process. It seems to take a long time to get your device certified. So what do you think the solution to that would be?
Okay.
I'll start, I guess. We feel the pain of certification. Every new generation of chipset, every customer who wants to get a device approved for use on a carrier network, it's a lot of work and a lot of investment that sometimes is a true barrier to innovators from bringing a device to market. I just outlined a minute ago how we've come down 4x in cost of a device in 3 years. Certification costs have not moved at near that pace, and that's got to change, or it's an inhibitor to the growth, that hockey stick that I think we all want to see. It's an absolute inhibitor, and I do know there are efforts underway by most of the operators to really streamline and lean out the certification test case load, the burden that's put on a device maker. So that's work underway. It's got to happen. We need to take a divide by 10 kind of a cut to the spending on a certification.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Craig. I mean, we need a radical change when it comes to test and certification for IoT. You cannot treat it in the same way that it has been with a smartphone. And there's perhaps a good case that you could look at certification, a minimum set of requirements based on the use cases. So, a lot of these solutions will be, say, in water meters, electricity meters, parking sensors, buried in the ground or in a basement somewhere. It's not moving anywhere. Why do you have to deal with things like roaming, handover? It's not necessary. So I think we need a radical approach to how we do IoT, because besides the cost, it will also inhibit innovation and the developer community in that.
Okay, so let's open up to questions from the floor. Are there any questions? Can you come to the microphone, please, so that we can hear there's a microphone in the middle of the alley there. If you can please state your name and where you're from.
Hi, my question is related to the non-IP data delivery and their use cases. So narrowband IoT and LTE-M1 are radio techniques and device categories that are part of the MTC framework developed by 3GPP. And non-IP data delivery is one of the features or capabilities in this framework where there is a new path for delivering non-IP payloads, which eliminates the need for having an IP stack in the devices. So my question is, from your experience and your exposure to this work, what do you think are the main use cases for non-IP, and do you think this will actually fly and there will be practical uses for non-IP?
So the main use cases that we've seen in the GSMA, we have been working with operators and their partners to deliver nearly 40 pilots last year in both technologies, in both LTE-M and narrowband IoT. And the use cases are pretty diverse, believe it or not. They are the obvious ones that you see there, and that's mainly because they are, large quantity, large corporate enterprise that you would like to get their particular business around, say, smart meter, the electricity meters and water meters, these fixed mobile applications. And they're probably the most common ones, but we have seen other solutions, and I think, Joe, you referred to it, in which seal monitoring, this may seem a very strange thing to do, but it's actually, monitoring an endangered species in the north of Scotland. And we've seen a pilot that Vodafone and the University of St Andrews have been doing. And for those who were at the Mobile World Congress, you would have seen that at our Innovation City solution on there. And you know, it's emerging all the time, the different solutions, very practical ones like LTE-M. We have seen that a pallet company, US pallet company called RM2, based out of Atlanta, have now created a new composite pallet embedded with LTE-M technology. So they are tracking globally these pallets, something they couldn't have done before. So quite a lot of diverse use cases, a lot of obvious ones, high volume ones, as I say, like that are fixed mobile type applications.
Yeah, and I think that pallet case, you know, there's over 1 billion pallets. I think that was the figure. I know it was in the billions, and so it's, you know, it's a substantial business where you can track pallets and make sure they're in the right place at the right time.
I think to his question specifically around the IP, you know, TCP/IP stack on the device, if you think about a lot of the use cases that are very simple sensors, you know, on, off, empty, full, hot, cold, whatever, the payload is so small to send that message over the network that the overhead of putting that on a TCP/IP through the TCP/IP protocol is swamped. You spend way more energy and way more network capacity just in the TCP/IP overhead than in the actual delivery of the message. This is way different from delivering, you know, thousands of bytes of video per second. You know, so it's just those use cases that are so small in data use, they lend themselves to a non-TCP/IP kind of regime. So the simpler protocols are more fitting for those use cases.
Any other questions? Please.
My name is Luc Boucher. I'm from TELUS in Canada. So everything that was just talked about here is relevant to the Canadian market space as well. I think what Craig said from LTE-M and
I'm sorry, can you
We
speak up a
can
little bit?
barely hear you.
Speak up.
Speak up, sure.
Yep.
So from M point of view and an NB-IoT, operators will actually do both because they're complementary. So I think from a developer community, they need to hear that message because it's important. It does introduce new use cases, but there's a path from M to NB that's seamless and gives operators a chance to go from very high bandwidth, the middle ground with M, to low through the NB-IoT. So there is a path for the customers to consider. My question for the panel is, if we look at the ecosystem of IoT and specifically in the LPWA area, we talked a lot about cost at the device. We're going to hear it on a network side from an operator point of view, but the enterprise customers are really struggling with their business cases. So I think the use cases are known. I think the technology is future-proofed for them in working with operators, but I think they're really struggling in the barrier of building these business case models to get that internal agreement that this is a project that they should do. Is there any advice or anything that you've seen from a global point of view?
Yeah, okay, I'll take a stab at
Go
that.
for it.
I think when it comes to business cases, an important thing to look at is life cycle costs. And sometimes business cases flip when you consider life cycle costs as one of the items in the business case. For instance, if a utility wants to go and convert all the meters to smart meters, there is probably a business case for that by saving costs to go to the sites and read meters, having a, let's say, narrowband IoT support in that smart meter, and a battery life of 10 years, perhaps cancel each other and you have a business case. There will be some situations where the business case is challenging, and I mean, we've got to work on costs and full life cycle of projects to ensure that it will work, and in some cases it won't. And maybe there's other technology for those type of business cases.
Okay, so I think we've got time for one quick question, maybe.
I'm Bajai Vazian with Wireless 2020. Along the same lines, our clients are also faced with the challenge of having a business case that shows a positive ROI for their IoT deployments. And they're very interested in the fact that the GSMA and the cellular industry, the LTE industry, has developed competitive standards and alternatives for the other technologies that they've been working with, which provide very cost-effective, low-cost means of deploying IoT solutions. But at the same time, they're faced with the challenge that typically those costs for an LTE-based solution are significantly higher than alternatives. And in many cases, there's no mobility requirement for those IoT applications, and the overhead associated with running it through a cellular network may be unnecessary. Even outside of the US, especially, some of the operators have embraced other non-licensed spectrum technologies in order to provide those entry paths into the IoT ecosystem so that they're not burdening their customers with heavy costs initially. So I'm wondering, why doesn't the LTE industry create that entry path itself? Why doesn't GSMA find a way to bring these ecosystems together rather than create more of a dichotomy between them?
Can I tell that, Shane?
Sure. I think a lot of it will depend on the particular use case in terms of when you come to ROI, TCO of that. I mean, the GSMA represent the interests of the mobile industry and the operators in that respect. And we're working as closely as we can with them to start breaking down a lot of those barriers and to, start using this new technology, which we think is going to change things. But we can't, we can't encompass everything that's out there in the particular market. There are alternative low-powered wide area solutions there using unlicensed spectrum, but I would question, do enterprises really want to be looking at that particularly long-term? Most enterprises are, as I mentioned earlier, are looking for certainty. But, there is a limit to what we can do, and we think that this solution is the best for enterprises because they have that experience in cellular in the past.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time, so I'm sure you can come and approach the panel immediately afterwards. So I'd like to thank Shane, Craig, and Kashif. Thank you.
Thank you.